Welcome to the deep dive where we dig into the heart of the matter. Today, it's Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Yeah, we're going to go deeper than just, what happens in Richard Bach's novella. It's about ambition, freedom, what it takes to be really great, even when everyone else thinks you're, a little different. Ready to fly with me? So we start with Jonathan, a seagull who's, obsessed with flying, but not just to, get food. He's got this deeper thing, he wants to know what wings can really do to push the limits of what any seagull's ever done. He's always experimenting, trying to go faster, trying different moves, and it makes him, kind of different from the rest. His parents, they're worried, right? They tell him to just, survive, be part of the flock. But Jonathan can't ignore this fire inside him. He tries to fit in for a bit, but it feels wrong. Like he's not being himself. He knows he's meant for more than just grabbing scraps, So he really dives into these experiments with speed. Day after day, he pushes himself, diving from crazy heights, testing how far his body can go.
There are crashes, moments where he wonders, am I being stupid? Is this even possible? Those doubts creep in. And then, boom, he figures it out. He finds these new ways to use his wings to go faster than any gull's ever gone before. He's doing these amazing tricks in the air like he's a pioneer in this world where other gulls just care about, not starving. He's so excited by what he's found. He imagines all gulls flying like this, free and exhilarated. He wants to go back to the flock, share his knowledge, have them all soaring with him, no limits. That's his dream. So, full of this hope, he goes back to the flock. He's tired, but he's excited, ready to show them what he can do. He does this victory loop in the air before landing, expecting them to be amazed to see, the genius he is. But it doesn't go that way. Instead, they call him to this big meeting, the council gathering. They've been waiting for him, but not to celebrate. They accuse him of being reckless, of breaking the rules of the gull family. They say he's wrong for being different, for wanting more than what they've always accepted.
He tries to explain, to make them see the potential, the freedom that's out there if they just open their minds. But they won't listen. They're scared of anything new, stuck in their old ways. So they call him an outcast, a danger to their order, and banish him to the far cliffs. It's like a punishment, this desolate place, for any gull who dares to be different. Jonathan's heartbroken. But even in that moment, when they're pushing him away, he knows he's found something incredible, something worth fighting for, even if it means being alone. And so he embraces being an outcast. He finds peace in the vast sky. He practices even harder, becoming even better. He explores the far cliffs, finding new techniques, mastering flight in these challenging conditions. In this place that they see as empty and harsh, he finds freedom and abundance. And as he's soaring there, free from the flock, something incredible happens. One evening, these two radiant gulls appear next to him. They're flying with this grace, this precision he's never seen before. Their feathers, they're glowing with this almost ethereal light. Without a word, they challenge him to this flight test. They match his every move, effortlessly.
He realizes he's finally found others who get it, who understand the true meaning of flight. They call themselves his brothers and tell him they're there to take him higher, take him home. Confused, but intrigued, Jonathan follows them as they climb higher into the darkness, leaving behind everything he's ever known. He feels this anticipation, this hope that maybe, just maybe, he's not alone in this quest for something more. And as he's going up with these glowing birds, he thinks, is this heaven? Ironic, right? To be asking that while you're, entering heaven. But that's Jonathan, always curious, always trying to understand. And as they leave Earth behind, something starts happening to him. His body, it's changing, it's starting to glow like theirs. Still his seagull body, but lighter, more refined, moving with this crazy grace. He can fly so much faster, twice the speed with half the effort. His feathers are this brilliant white, wings shimmering like polished silver. He tests it out, pushes his speed, and it's incredible. But then he hits a limit. He thought heaven would be limitless, right?
And the other gulls, they disappear, just like that, gone. He's on his own to discover this new world. He finds himself over this huge ocean, these rugged cliffs coming into view. And there were gulls there, flying effortlessly, but just a few. And he wonders, why isn't this place packed with gulls if it's heaven? And memories of his old life, struggling for food, being rejected by the flock, they come back to him. But it's all hazy, like a distant dream. He focuses on the present, right? He's getting closer to the shore now, and there's a dozen gulls waiting for him. They're just standing there, this peaceful silence. He feels a sense of belonging, like he's finally home. He's about to land, flapping his wings to slow down. But then he stops, watches the other gulls. They're not flapping. They're just adjusting their feathers, riding the air currents, landing softly on the sand, all in perfect unison. It's this amazing display of control, like a level of mastery he's never seen before. And Jonathan, he's exhausted from his trip. So he kind of gives up on trying to land gracefully and just plops down on the beach, totally wiped out.
Sleep takes over. And that's the end of this crazy day, a day that started, well, I can't even remember where it started. The next few days, he just immerses himself in this new place. There's still so much to learn about flying, but it's different here. The other gulls, they get it. They're not just trying to survive. They're all about honing their skills, exploring what flight can really be. They're all striving for perfection in everything they do, helping each other along the way. No judgment, no competition. He spends hours practicing with them, learning these advanced techniques, these aerial maneuvers. He almost forgets about Earth, the world where gulls fight over scraps, completely unaware of what their wings can really do. But sometimes the memories come back, and there's this tinge of sadness, this longing for something he can't quite explain. One day, after a particularly intense practice with his instructor Sullivan, Jonathan asks him, why are there so few gulls in this world? And Sullivan explains, see, Jonathan's case, it's rare, a 1 in a million thing. Most gulls, they evolve slowly, he says, moving between worlds that are almost identical to the last. They don't remember where they came from, they don't care where they're going, they just exist in the moment. And he goes on to say that for most gulls, it takes lifetimes, many lifetimes, just to even consider the idea that there's something more to life than eating and fighting. They go through these cycles of learning and forgetting, of striving and enduring, just to get a glimpse of what perfection is, to realize that the purpose of life is to seek that perfection and express it. And he looks at Jonathan with this admiration, and says, you, John, you learned so much so fast, you skipped 1,000 lifetimes to get here. Jonathan feels, humbled and proud at the same time. He realizes that his obsession with being the best back on Earth, that's what brought him to this amazing place. They go back to their practice, working on these complicated formation point rolls, and Jonathan struggles to keep up. It's like, even in this advanced place, there's always new challenges and new levels to reach. That evening, as the gulls gather on the beach, Jonathan decides to seek out Chang, the elder gull. This wise, powerful bird, they say he's close to moving on to the next world.
And Jonathan's a little hesitant, is it okay to question things even in this supposed heaven? But Chang, he welcomes him with this warm gaze, this gentle wisdom in his eyes. And Jonathan just comes right out and asks, Chang, this place, it's not really heaven, is it? And Chang smiles, like he knew this question was coming, and says, you're learning again, Jonathan Seagull. And Jonathan's confused, right? If this isn't heaven, then what is it? What's next? So he pushes further. Is there no such place as heaven? And Chang's answer, it's unexpected, profound. No, Jonathan, he says, there's no such place. Heaven isn't a place, it's not a time. Heaven's being perfect. He pauses, lets that sink in, and then says, you have a great deal of speed, don't you? And Jonathan, he's a little surprised, but he's also pleased, like the elder noticed him. I enjoy speed, he replies.
And Chang explains, you will begin to touch heaven, Jonathan, in the moment you touch perfect speed. And that isn't flying 1,000 miles an hour, or 1,000,000, or even the speed of light. Because any number you can put on it, that's a limit, and perfection doesn't have limits. Perfect speed, my son, is being there. And prove his point, he does something incredible. He just vanishes from where he's standing and reappears instantly by the water a good distance away. Then, in a blink, he's gone again and back by Jonathan's side. It's kind of fun, wouldn't you say? He asks. Jonathan's just blown away. He completely forgets about heaven. He wants to know how Chang does that, what it feels like, how far you can go. And Chang explains, with practice, you can go anywhere, anytime. He's seen countless worlds, experienced countless moments just by focusing his intention. It's a funny thing, he says. The gulls who are so busy trying to go somewhere, they forget about being perfect, and they end up going nowhere, slowly. And the gulls who put all their effort into being perfect, they can go anywhere, instantly. He emphasizes, remember, Jonathan, heaven isn't a place or a time. Because place and time are ultimately, they don't matter. Heaven is. But before he can finish, Jonathan, he's so fired up about this new skill, he interrupts, can you teach me to fly like that? Chang smiles, like, of course, he knew that's what Jonathan wanted. Of course, he says, if that's what you want. And Jonathan, his eyes are shining with this fierce determination. I do. When can we start? And Chang, the patient teacher, just says, we can start now if you wish. Jonathan's full of purpose, excitement. I'm ready, he says. And Chang, with his knowing look, gives him this cryptic piece of advice. To fly as fast as thought, he says, to go any place that is, you must begin by knowing that you have already arrived. And with that, Jonathan dives into practice, follows Chang's instructions with this incredible intensity. Day after day, he puts everything he has into it. But he can't move, not even a feather's width from his starting point. And Chang watches him struggle, encourages him, guides him. He reminds Jonathan to let go of faith, to embrace understanding. Forget about faith, he says.
You didn't need faith to fly. You needed to understand how. This is the same. Now try again. And then one day, as Jonathan's standing on the shore, eyes closed, focusing everything he has, it happens. It clicks. This wave of understanding washes over him. Why, it's true, he realizes. I am a perfect, unlimited Gaul. And he feels this surge of joy, this freedom, unlike anything he's ever known. Good, Chang says simply. Jonathan opens his eyes, and he's stunned. He's somewhere else entirely, standing on a different shore, lush green trees lining the water, 2 yellow suns blazing in the sky. And Chang, he's just standing there, calm as can be, like this is no big deal. Looks like we're on another planet, he observes, with a green sky and a double star. And Jonathan, he just lets out this whoop of triumph, the first sound he's made since leaving Earth. It works, he exclaims. Chang, ever the pragmatist, gently reminds him. Well, of course it works, John. It always works when you know what you're doing. Now, about your control. And Jonathan, hungry to learn more, throws himself into practice, exploring all the possibilities of this newfound understanding.
By the time they make it back to their home beach, it's night. The other gulls, they gather around Jonathan, their golden eyes wide with wonder. They saw him disappear, saw him do the impossible. But Jonathan waves it off, insists he's just a beginner, still has a lot to learn. I'm not so sure about that, John, Sullivan says. You have less fear of learning than any gull I've seen in 10,000 years. The flock falls silent, and Jonathan squirms a little, a mix of pride and embarrassment. Chang, sensing Jonathan's ready for the next challenge, says, We can work with time if you wish, John, until you can fly into the past and future, and then you'll be ready to begin the hardest, the most powerful, the most fun part of all. You'll be ready to begin to fly up and know what we mean by kindness and love. And Jonathan, inspired by these words, dives in, learning at an incredible pace. He spends what feels like weeks exploring the intricacies of time travel, pushing his understanding beyond anything he thought possible. And then one day, Chang is gone. He'd been speaking to the flock, telling them to never stop learning, practicing, striving for a deeper understanding of the perfect, invisible principle that governed all life. And as he speaks, his feathers grow brighter and brighter until no gull can look at him directly. And his last words to Jonathan, they echo with this deep and lasting message. Jonathan, he says, keep working on love. And just like that, he's gone. In the days that follow, Jonathan finds himself thinking more and more about Earth, the world he left behind. He realizes that if he'd known even a fraction of what he knows now back then, his life would have been so much richer, so much more meaningful. And he wonders if there might be other gulls like him on Earth, gulls who are struggling to break free, who are yearning for something more than just the daily grind of survival. He imagines a gull, maybe an outcast like himself, longing to understand what flight truly is, to experience the joy and freedom he's found. And as he delves deeper into his lessons on kindness, as he contemplates the nature of love, his desire to return to Earth grows stronger. He feels a pull, a need to share his wisdom, to help others see the world in a new way. He talks to Sullivan, tells him about his desire to go back to his old flock, to teach them what he's learned. And Sullivan, even though he's amazing at thought speed flight, even though he's great at teaching others, he's skeptical. John, he says, you were an outcast there. Why do you think any of them would listen to you now? You know the proverb, and it's true. The gull who flies highest sees farthest. Those gulls you're talking about, they're still down there, fighting and squabbling. They're 1,000 miles from heaven, and you're talking about showing them heaven from where they stand. John, they can't even see their own wingtips. Stay here. Help the new gulls, the ones who have flown high enough to understand what you're offering. He pauses, lets that sink in, then asks, what if Chang had gone back to his old worlds? Where would you be today? Autry. And Jonathan, he knows Sullivan's right. The gull who flies the highest, he sees the most. He decides to stay and work with the new arrivals, all bright and eager to learn. But he can't shake the feeling that there might be 1 or 2 gulls back on Earth who are ready, who are open. And he thinks about how much more he would have known if Chang had come to him on the day he was banished. He goes back to Sullivan, tells him his decision. Solly, he says, I have to go back. Your students are doing well. They can help you with the new ones. And Sullivan sighs, knowing there's no changing Jonathan's mind. I think I'll miss you, Jonathan, he says. Jonathan's surprised by this sudden sentimentality. Sully, for shame, he says. Don't be ridiculous. What are we practicing every day? If our friendship depends on things like space and time, then when we finally overcome those things, we've destroyed our brotherhood. But overcome space, and all we have left is here. Overcome time, and all we have left is now. In between here and now, don't you think we might see each other once or twice? And Sullivan, he can't help but laugh. You're a crazy bird, John, he says. If anybody can show those earthbound gulls how to see 1,000 miles, it's Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Goodbye, John, my friend. And Jonathan, confident that their connection goes beyond any physical limitations, assures him, goodbye, Sully, we'll meet again. And with that, he focuses his mind, pictures the vast flocks of gulls on the shores of his old world. He remembers what it felt like to be trapped in that limited body, bound by the laws of physics and the expectations of the flock. But now he understands that he is not just flesh and bone. He is a perfect idea of freedom and flight, and nothing can hold him back. As Jonathan prepares to return to Earth, our focus shifts to another young gull, Fletcher Lynn Seagull, who's facing his own challenges within the flock. Fletcher, he's a spirited, rebellious bird, and he's been ostracized for his unconventional flying. He's frustrated by the flock's narrow-mindedness, their obsession with the mundane aspects of survival. He yearns for something more, something beyond the ordinary, and he's been unjustly punished for a simple act of playful flying, doing a barrel roll around the elder gull. Branded an outcast, banished to the far cliffs, he's filled with anger and resentment. As he flies towards the far cliffs, fuming over the injustice he's endured, a gentle voice interrupts his thoughts. Mysterious voice. Don't be too hard on them, Fletcher Seagull. By casting you out, they've only harmed themselves. One day they'll realize that, and one day they'll see what you see. Forgive them, and help them to understand. Fletcher's startled by the voice, a voice that seems to come from inside his own head. He looks around and spots a magnificent white gull effortlessly flying beside him, matching his speed perfectly. Mysterious voice. Fletcher Lynn Seagull, do you want to fly? Fletcher without hesitation replies, Fletcher, yes, I want to fly. Mysterious voice. Fletcher Lynn Seagull, do you want to fly so much that you'll forgive the flock and learn to go back to them one day and help them understand? Fletcher's taken aback by the question, by the wisdom and kindness radiating from this mysterious gull. He can't deny the truth in the voice's words. He realizes that his longing for flight, his yearning for something more, goes beyond his anger and resentment. I do, he answers softly. The radiant white gull smiles. Jonathan. Then Fletch, let's start with level flight. And so begins Fletcher's transformative journey, guided by none other than Jonathan Livingston Seagull, who has returned to Earth to share his wisdom, to spread the message of freedom and flight to those who are ready to listen. Jonathan's watching from above as Fletcher, his new student, really tests his limits. Diving, soaring, just enjoying the freedom of the sky. He sees himself in Fletcher, that same fire, that same drive to push the boundaries, that same frustration with the flock's limitations. Fletcher tries this really complicated maneuver, a 16-point vertical slow roll, calling out each point as he goes. But he's struggling to keep control, losing speed, and ends up in this crazy whip stall, tumbling through the air before he manages to recover. He's exhausted, discouraged. He's beating himself up, thinking he'll never get it. And Jonathan's watching patiently, offering encouragement, pointing out what's not quite right, reminding him smoothness, firmness, yet smoothness. He flies alongside Fletcher, demonstrates the move, shows him how to maintain control, how to transition between points with grace and precision. Over the next 3 months, Jonathan gathers a small group of outcasts, 6 students who are eager to explore this new idea of flight, like it's a form of self-expression, a celebration of freedom. They love the thrill of high-speed maneuvers, the aerial acrobatics. But they struggle to grasp the deeper meaning behind what Jonathan's teaching them. He tries to explain, that each gull is an embodiment of the great gull, this limitless idea of freedom, and that precision flying is a way to express their true nature. He tells them to let go of their limitations, their fears, their beliefs, to really experience liberation. He tells them, everything that limits us, we have to let go of it. That's the point of all this high-speed flying, low-speed flying, all these aerobatics. But his words, they often fall on deaf ears. His students, they're tired from all the training, focus more on the physical challenges than the philosophy. They enjoy the practice, the feeling of pushing their limits. But they don't really believe that the flight of ideas can be as real as the flight of, wind and feather. He keeps guiding them, tells them that their whole being, from wingtip to wingtip, is nothing more than their thought made visible. Break the chains of your thought, he tells them, and you break the chains of your body too. But no matter how eloquently he puts it, it sounds like a myth to them, something nice to think about before you go to sleep. A month later, Jonathan feels it's time to go back to the flock. His students are nervous, afraid of facing that rejection again. They remind him of the ancient law of the flock, a law that stood for 10,000 years. An outcast never returns. But Jonathan, he challenges that. We can go anywhere we choose, he says, and be what we are. He lifts off from the sand, turns eastward, towards the flock's home ground, leaving his students to wrestle with their doubts. Fletcher, torn between loyalty to his teacher and fear of the flock, rationalizes their decision to follow. Well, we don't have to follow their rules if we're not part of the flock, do we? He says. Besides, if there's trouble, we can be a lot more help there than here. First. And so, 8 strong, they fly westward in this tight double diamond formation, their wingtips almost touching, cutting through the sky at 135 miles an hour. They arrive at the flock's council beach in this spectacular display of synchronized aerial maneuvers, rolling, looping, landing together, coming to a stop in perfect unison on the sand. And the flock? Well, they are speechless. Their daily squabbles, their routines, all forgotten as they watch this incredible spectacle. And Jonathan, like it's the most normal thing in the world, starts critiquing the flight, pointing out little imperfections in their formation. The flock is in chaos. These birds, these outcasts, they've come back. It's unheard of, a violation of their most sacred traditions. But the younger gulls, they're not so worried about the rules. They're just, blown away by the skill. Where'd they learn to fly like that, one whispers. It's unbelievable, another says. I've never seen anything like it. The word goes out. Ignore them. To speak to an outcast is to become an outcast yourself. Even to look at one is to break the law. But Jonathan, he seems unfazed by the cold stares, the averted eyes. He keeps practicing, right there above the council beach, pushing his students harder than ever, demanding excellence, wanting them to really show what they're capable of. He calls out Martin, this quiet, unassuming gull, challenges him to prove he understands low-speed flight. And Martin, surprised by the demand, astounds everyone, even himself, by becoming this master of slow velocities, able to ride the slightest breeze, soaring from the sand to the clouds and back again without a single flap of his wings. Charles Rowland, spurred by Jonathan's encouragement, pushes himself to new heights, reaches 24,000 feet, his feathers tinged blue by the thin, icy air, determined to go even higher the next day. Fletcher, the aerial acrobat, finally masters that 16-point vertical slow roll, and then, just to show off, he tops it off with a triple cartwheel, his feathers flashing in the sunlight, catching the eye of more than a few curious onlookers. And through it all, there's Jonathan, always there, flying alongside his students, guiding them, pushing them to their limits, sharing his passion for the pure joy of flight. He leads them through night flights in the clouds, through raging storms, embracing the challenge, while the flock huddles on the ground, bound by their fears and their traditions. As the days turn into weeks, the students start to really listen to Jonathan's teachings. They still don't understand everything, but they see the truth in some of it. They see the value in his guidance, his ability to see their potential, to push them beyond what they thought they could do. And as word of Jonathan's return spreads, something strange starts happening. A circle of curious gulls begins to form around the practicing students each night, listening in the darkness, eager to hear Jonathan's words but too afraid to be seen associating with outcasts. They melt away before dawn, their curiosity battling with their fear. A month after Jonathan's return, a gull breaks the unspoken rule and crosses the line. Terence Lowell Gull, he approaches Jonathan and asks for instruction. And in that moment he becomes an outcast, but he also becomes the 7th of Jonathan's disciples. The next evening, Kirk Maynard Gull, a bird struggling with a damaged wing, collapses at Jonathan's feet, begging for help. I want to fly more than anything else in the world, he pleads. And Jonathan, seeing the longing in Maynard's eyes, encourages him. Come along then, he says. Fly up with me and we'll start. But you don't understand, Maynard protests. My wing, I can't move it. Jonathan's voice rings with conviction as he reminds him. Maynard Gull, he says, you have the freedom to be yourself, your true self, here and now, and nothing can stand in your way. It's the law of the great gull, the law that is. Maynard, clinging to a sliver of hope, asks, are you saying I can fly? I'm saying you are free, Jonathan replies simply, and in that moment something shifts inside Maynard. He spreads his wings effortlessly and rises into the night sky, his cry of joy echoing through the darkness. I can fly, he shouts. Listen to me. I can fly. Why? And the flock, awakened by his triumphant cries, witnesses a miracle, a bird they thought was broken, soaring freely through the air. By morning, almost 1,000 gulls have gathered around the circle of students, their curiosity overcoming their fear. They listen intently as Jonathan speaks, his words simple but profound. He explains that it is a gull's right to fly, that freedom is their natural state, and that anything that stands in the way of that freedom, whether it's ritual or superstition or self-doubt, must be discarded. Even if it's the law of the flock, a gull from the crowd asks. The only true law is that which leads us to freedom, Jonathan responds. There is no other. How do you expect us to fly like you? Another gull asks. You're special, gifted, divine, better than ordinary birds. Jonathan gestures towards his students. Look at Fletcher, he says. Look at Lowell, Charles Rowland, Judy Lee. Are they special, gifted, divine, no more than you are, no more than I am? The only difference, the only one, is that they have begun to understand what they really are, and they've begun to practice it. His students, all except Fletcher, squirm a little, realizing that what they've been doing has been seen as something extraordinary, something unattainable for ordinary gulls. They hadn't understood that they were demonstrating a truth that's available to anyone willing to put in the work. The crowd grows larger every day, drawn to Jonathan's message. Some come seeking knowledge, some come seeking inspiration, and some come seeking to discredit him, to cling to their comfortable beliefs. One day, after a particularly demanding practice session, Fletcher tells Jonathan about the rumors that are going around the flock. They're saying, he says, that if you're not the son of the great gull himself, then you're 1,000 years ahead of your time. Jonathan sighs, accepting the burden of being misunderstood, knowing that people will either demonize or deify those who challenge their worldviews. Well, what do you think, Fletch? He asks. Are we ahead of our time? Fletcher considers the question carefully. Well, this way of flying, it's always been there for anyone who wanted to find it, he says. It has nothing to do with time. Maybe we're ahead of the fashion, ahead of the way most gulls fly. Jonathan smiles, relieved that Fletcher sees through the hype, understands that true progress isn't about being ahead of one's time, but about aligning with timeless principles. A week later, disaster strikes. Fletcher's demonstrating high-speed flight to a group of new students when a young bird, on its first flight, calling for its mother, flies right into his path. With barely a moment to react, Fletcher swerves sharply to avoid a collision, but at over 200 miles an hour, the maneuver sends him crashing into a solid granite cliff. For Fletcher, it's like stepping through a door into another dimension. There's a flash of terror, a jolt of shock, darkness, and then he's floating in this strange, unfamiliar sky. Memories flitting in and out of his mind, filled with regret and sorrow. He hears Jonathan's voice, familiar and comforting, gently reminding him, "The trick, Fletcher, is to learn to overcome the things that limit us one at a time, patiently. We don't try to fly through rock until later in the program." Fletcher is disoriented, confused. "Jonathan," he exclaims. "Also known as the son of the great gull," Jonathan says playfully. "What brings you here? The cliff. Didn't I die?" Jonathan, amused by Fletcher's dramatics, helps him to regain his composure. "Oh, Fletch, come on now," he says. "Think. If you're talking to me now, you obviously didn't die, did you? What you did was shift your level of consciousness a bit. Now you have a choice. You can stay here and learn on this plane, which is much higher than the one you just left, by the way. Or you can go back and keep working with the flock. The elders were expecting some kind of disaster, but they're really impressed with how well you obliged them." Fletcher, eager to get back to his teaching, declares, "I want to go back to the flock, of course. I've barely started with the new bunch." "Very well, Fletcher," Jonathan says. "Remember what we were saying about one's body being nothing more than thought." And in an instant, Fletcher finds himself back on Earth, at the base of the cliff, surrounded by the entire flock. And the flock, they react with a mixture of awe and terror. Some see him as a resurrected hero, touched by the divine. Others see him as a demonic figure, a threat to their order and their beliefs. The cry of "devil" rises from the crowd, and they surge forward, beaks bared, eyes glazed with fear and rage, intent on destroying Fletcher. Jonathan, sensing the imminent danger, asks calmly, "Shall we go, Fletcher?" Fletcher, still shaken by the near-death experience and the mob's reaction, replies, "I wouldn't mind if we did." And instantly they're transported half a mile away, leaving the angry mob grasping at empty air. Jonathan, genuinely puzzled by the flock's behavior, muses, "Why is it," he asks, "that convincing a bird of his freedom and of his ability to demonstrate it is always the hardest thing we have to do? Why is it so hard?" Fletcher, still processing everything that's happened, asks, "What did you just do?" he asks. "How did we get here?" And Jonathan's answer is a simple truth that sums up his whole philosophy. "Like everything else, Fletcher," he says, "practice." The next day, the flock has calmed down, their frenzy forgotten. But Fletcher hasn't forgotten the experience, the raw intensity of the mob's hatred. "Jonathan," he asks, "remember what you said a long time ago about loving the flock enough to come back and help them learn?" "Yes," Jonathan replies. "I don't understand how you can love a mob that just tried to kill you," Fletcher confesses, still struggling with Jonathan's perspective. Jonathan, his voice gentle and understanding, explains, "Oh, Fletch, you don't love that," he says. "You don't love hatred and evil, of course. You have to practice and see the real gull, the good in every one of them, and help them to see it themselves. That's what I mean by love. It's fun when you get the hang of it." He reminds Fletcher of his own transformation.
"I remember a fierce young bird once," he says. "His name was Fletcher Lynn Seagull, freshly outcast, ready to fight the flock to the death, getting ready to make his own bitter hell right there on the far cliffs. And here he is today, building his own heaven instead, and leading the whole flock in that direction." Fletcher, startled by Jonathan's words, protests, "Me leading? What do you mean, me leading? You're the teacher here. You can't leave." Jonathan smiles, knowing that Fletcher is ready to take on the mantle of leadership. Can I? He asks. Don't you think that there might be other flocks, other Fletchers, who need a teacher more than this one, which is already on its way to the light? Fletcher, still unsure of himself, says, Me. John, I'm just an ordinary seagull, and you're... Jonathan, anticipating Fletcher's next words, finishes the sentence for him. The only son of the great gull, I suppose. He sighs and looks out to sea, a hint of longing in his eyes. You don't need me any more, Fletch, he says. You need to keep finding yourself, a little more each day, that real, unlimited Fletcher Seagull. He's your instructor. You need to understand him and practice him.
Jonathan's form begins to shimmer, becoming translucent as he prepares to move on. He gives Fletcher one last piece of advice. Don't let them make me a god, okay, Fletch, he says. I'm a seagull. I like to fly, maybe. Fletcher, sensing the imminent departure of his friend and mentor, cries out, Jonathan! Jonathan's voice, fading into the distance, offers words of comfort and guidance. Poor Fletch, he says. Don't believe what your eyes are telling you. All they show is limitation. Look with your understanding. Find out what you already know, and you'll see the way to fly. The shimmering stops. Jonathan Seagull is gone. Fletcher gathers his courage and takes to the sky, ready to face his new students, to carry on Jonathan's legacy. He starts his lesson, repeating the words he's heard so many times before, but now with a deeper understanding, a sense of ownership. To begin with, he says, you have to understand that a seagull is an unlimited idea of freedom, an image of the great gull, and your whole body, from wingtip to wingtip, is nothing more than your thought itself made visible. The young gulls look at him with puzzled expressions, expecting a more practical lesson on how to do a loop or a roll. Fletcher sighs, realizing the challenge ahead of him, the difficulty of conveying such a profound concept. He smiles wryly and starts again. Very well, he says. Let's start with level flight. And as he said those words, he understands that Jonathan was no more divine than he was. They were both just gulls, both capable of extraordinary things, both limited only by their own beliefs. A thought flashes through his mind, a playful challenge to a departed friend. No limits, Jonathan, he thinks. Well then, the time's not far off when I'll show up on your beach out of thin air and show you a thing or two about flying. He glances at his students, their eyes filled with anticipation, and a wave of affection washes over him. He sees their potential, their eagerness to learn, and he knows that Jonathan's message of freedom and flight will live on, spreading and inspiring generations of gulls to come. For a time, the flock experiences a golden age. Fletcher and Jonathan's other students travel far and wide, sharing their knowledge, spreading the joy of flight to other flocks. Remarkable things start happening. Young gulls perform aerial acrobatics with a grace and precision never seen before. Some, pushing beyond their perceived limits, vanish from the earth altogether, their spirits transcending the confines of the physical realm. But as time goes on, things begin to change. The flock's focus shifts from the practice of Jonathan's teachings to the rulership of his persona. They obsess over his words, his gestures, his appearance, seeking to elevate him to the status of a god. They lose sight of the fundamental truth that he was just a gull who discovered a way to break free from the limitations they themselves had created. Fletcher is saddened by this turn of events. He tries to guide them back to the practice, to the experience of freedom. But his words are drowned out by the clamor for rituals and ceremonies. They build shrines, they collect pebbles, they recite meaningless chants, all in the name of a gull they never truly understood. The symbol of Jonathan's teachings, once a representation of the freedom of flight, is reduced to a simple pebble, an inanimate object devoid of the spirit it was meant to embody. One by one, the original students pass away, leaving behind a legacy that has been twisted and distorted. The flock buries them under piles of pebbles, each pebble representing a missed opportunity, a chance to embrace the true essence of their teachings that was never taken. Fletcher is the last to go, his body disappearing during a breathtaking aerial display, his spirit soaring beyond the constraints of the physical world. But the flock, blinded by their rituals and dogma, misinterpret his departure, weaving elaborate tales of divine ascension and heavenly shores. The practice of flight, once a celebration of freedom and joy, becomes a rigid and empty ritual. The thoughtful gulls, the ones who still yearn for true understanding, they avoid the shrines, their minds shutting down at the mere mention of Jonathan's name, their spirits weighed down by the burden of hollow traditions. But even in this oppressive atmosphere, a glimmer of hope remains. Young gulls like Anthony Seagull, disillusioned by the hypocrisy and emptiness of the flock's rituals, begin to question the status quo. They long for authenticity, for a tangible demonstration of the power and freedom that Jonathan embodied. Anthony challenges the flock's beliefs, arguing that true holiness cannot be found in the accumulation of pebbles or the recitation of empty phrases. He demands proof, a visible manifestation of the principles they claim to uphold. He wants to see someone fly at 200 miles an hour, to see the reality of Jonathan's teachings, not just hear stories and legends. Driven by his need for authenticity, Anthony decides to end his life, seeing no point in continuing in a world devoid of meaning and joy. But as he dives towards the ocean, preparing to embrace oblivion, he sees something that rekindles his hope, something that shakes him to his core. He sees another gull, a white streak blazing across the sky, performing an incredible display of aerial maneuvers, a symphony of loops, rolls, and dives. It's a sight he thought existed only in myth, a demonstration of skill and freedom that surpasses anything he's ever seen before. Overwhelmed with awe, he calls out to the mysterious gull, desperate to learn more, to understand the source of such mastery. And the gull, his voice as clear and friendly as the wind, introduces himself simply. "You can call me John," he says, and in that simple introduction a new chapter begins. The spirit of Jonathan Livingston Seagull lives on, passed from one generation to the next, inspiring those who seek truth, freedom, and the boundless joy of flight. Well, we've taken a deep dive into the world of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, haven't we? Explored ambition, freedom, the pursuit of excellence, and the challenges of staying true to yourself in a world that often demands conformity. We went beyond the surface of the story, looked at the symbolism, the deeper meanings. So here are, let's say, 10 key takeaways from our exploration. Number 1, passion fuels purpose. Jonathan's relentless pursuit of perfect flight, even when it made him an outcast, shows us how powerful passion can be in driving us towards a greater purpose. Number 2, break boundaries. Jonathan's daring experiments with speed and aerobatics highlight the importance of challenging conventional thinking, of pushing the limits of what we think is possible. Number 3, embrace being an outcast. Sometimes being labeled an outcast can actually be a catalyst for growth and self-discovery, leading to deeper understanding and greater mastery. Number 4, heaven is a state of being. True fulfillment isn't about reaching a specific place or time. It's about achieving a state of perfection, a continuous journey of learning and pushing boundaries. Number 5, perfect speed is presence. The ultimate goal isn't to fly at a certain speed, it's to be fully present in each moment, to transcend the limitations of space and time. Number 6, love has transformative power. The spirit of Jonathan Livingston Seagull lives on, inspiring new generations of seekers to embrace freedom, challenge limitations, and find their own unique paths to excellence. The story of Jonathan Livingston Seagull isn't just about literal flight, It's about the flight of the human spirit, our capacity to transcend our limitations, to embrace our true potential, to live lives filled with meaning and purpose. So, as you navigate the complexities of your own life, ask yourself, what are your far cliffs? What conventions are you willing to challenge? What limitations are you ready to break free from? And maybe most importantly, what truths are you willing to share to inspire others to take flight? This has been The Deep Dive. Keep seeking, keep soaring, and until next time, happy landings.